Okay, I think we'll start now. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you may be in the world. My name is Alfredo Valles Diaz, and I am the assistant to the village manager for North Bay Village. I will be serving as today's master of ceremony. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to the first briefing on blockchain and cryptocurrencies for local government. Today's event is sponsored by Miami-Dade County, North Bay Village, in partnership with the Global Blockchain Business Council. I'll now hand things off to Margaret Brisbane. She's the Chief Innovation Officer for Miami-Dade County.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Margaret Brisbane, and it is an honor and a privilege to be here today. And I would like to start out by welcoming our mayors. And thank you, Mayor Daniella Levine Cava, for taking the time out on a Monday morning to start us off on this educational journey. So I would really, without further ado, turn this over to Mayor Cava for her welcoming words. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so very much, Margaret. It is great to be here with all of you for this first of first. I love that. And of course, it is Miami-Dade County's first blockchain seminar. So many worked hard to pull this together, and we're glad you're here to be part of the important conversation. We all know that a year and a half of this pandemic have changed and upended our lives in so many ways. And so we are more ready than ever, at least I am, to embrace a new normal. So we're leaning into this moment of unique disruption and new opportunities, and we can embrace new technologies and leverage new ideas to continue moving forward. I think that's what this moment provides us. As we know, the communities that have been the most effective have been strategic, and they have emerged in these unprecedented times in a position to grow and prosper for years to come. I believe that Miami-Dade County is one such community. So I'm very, very proud to serve as mayor, and proud of the leadership of Margaret Brisbane as our CIO, and to partner with also my good friend, Mayor Latham. So thank you for making me part of this. So one of the new and emerging technologies that we are looking at embracing across the world, of course, which has already been here for some time, but now we're really leaning in, is blockchain. So when people think of blockchain technology, the first thing that comes to mind is usually cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum. But the reality is that there are many wonderful applications of this technology that we can harness to innovate and change the world, not just cryptocurrency. And so through blockchain technology, we can revolutionize sectors like agriculture, healthcare, banking, and more. And daily, I am getting solicitations in my inbox for new and exciting applications, which I channel to Margaret and ask her to review for their relevance and application to us in the county. Through blockchain technology, we can revolutionize sectors, like I said, and so this will hold the power to transform our economy and our society. If we get it right, we can leverage blockchain to expand opportunity, transparency, and equity. So I want to emphasize that. As with new technologies and growth opportunities, it's really important that we ask ourselves some key and critical questions from the very outset. Who will benefit from this growth? And how do we ensure that investments in this area expand opportunities equitably for more communities across Miami-Dade, not just a few, but all of our communities? And how will we leverage these innovations to tackle some of our biggest challenges? That's what we hope that we can do with this technology. So I am delighted that we're coming together to learn more and to better understand these applications and how they can benefit us here in Miami-Dade County and also across the world as we move forward in a thoughtful and responsible way. So I want to thank Global Blockchain Business Council and Sandra for leading today's conversation, and also again to thank my colleague, North Bay Village Mayor Latham, and our CIO Brisbane for their leadership in organizing today's event. Today is an important early opportunity to engage on this topic, but it certainly will not be the last. And I'll be learning alongside all of you as we go forward. So I look forward to working with each of you as we consider initiatives in the space, so many other new and rapidly growing fields, and we want to improve the lives of our residents, grow our economy, and create new opportunities for shared prosperity through this technology. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Madam Mayor. Someone says creativity is thinking up new things, innovation is doing new things. So we thank you for your leadership and for supporting these types of environments that foster innovation. Just wanted to give a quick note to everyone. We'll welcome your questions at any point during today's webinar. You can submit them in the Q&A tab right at the bottom of your screen, and we'll take them throughout. Talking about innovative leaders, it is my pleasure to introduce you to a person that I have the honor of working with on a daily basis, North Bay Village Mayor Brent Latham. But first, just wanted to note that subsequent to Mayor Latham's remark, the brilliant Sandra Ro, our main presenter, will take over and kickstart the first part of today's briefing. Mayor Latham, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alfredo. Thank you, Mayor Levine, Cava. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'll keep my remarks brief because we all came, of course, to learn more about blockchain technology and its applications. I really do want to start by thanking Alfredo, thanking Margaret, and also the GBBC team for leading the logistics of putting this together and making it happen. We have a really strong turnout. You know, there was great interest in this, which as a government official tells you, this is something that people want to see their elected officials looking into and figuring out, you know, how can we incorporate these technologies and developments for the good of our constituents. And so this is a first step in North Bay Village towards making that happen. And I think a very strong one, thanks to the leadership of our team in putting this together. You know, over the last few years, we've seen a real explosion, which everyone is aware of in blockchain technology, obviously in the financial sector with cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum and the like, so many of them coming into the public consciousness now, but also as a potential solution for large scale problems like improving the traceability and transparency of supply chains, securing digital identities for displaced populations, and reducing the spread of misinformation and misused content via NFTs, among many others. You know, at the local level, as Mayor Levine Cava alluded to, we're early to the party here. And that's something that we certainly want to be. In a place like North Bay Village, which by Miami-Dade standards has been relatively underdeveloped throughout the years, we have a chance to actually skip forward now in terms of our service to our residents by incorporating the best of new technologies like blockchain. And so that's something that it behooves us in the same boat to look at this in terms of skipping straight to the next generation, the future generation of technologies that can service our constituents. You know, as it currently stands, local governments still lack a better understanding of the basics of blockchain technology and what exactly that means. So it's our responsibility as public servants to transform our approach to new technologies and dedicate the time to understand the basic principles and concepts that are shaping the future of the world we're living in. That's why my team, along with our colleagues at the county level and GBBC, have decided to work together to deliver this briefing to us so that we can understand the benefits and risks blockchain technology entails and take informed blockchain-related decisions on behalf of our and your constituents. So thanks, really looking forward to hearing from Sandra and learning a lot from this seminar this morning.
Welcome, everybody, and good morning. So glad that you are here with us. And I want to thank our leadership, CIO Margaret Brisbane, Mayor Daniella Cava, and as well, obviously, Mayor Brent Latham. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And we couldn't have done this without Alfredo, Sophia, Brandon, and many others on the GBBC bringing this together. Today is a very different type of briefing that you may be expecting. It's not really so much a tutorial as a practical state of where are we in blockchain and cryptocurrencies and digital assets. We will outline some more of the definitional and technical aspects, but really, and we want to get to the pragmatic resources, use cases, and provide the tools for you to begin that journey if you're just beginning. And for those of you who are experts and working in this space 24/7, as many of you are, as passionate as you are, figuring out who to connect with. And ultimately, we want to provide the tools to do that. So as the mayors have said, this is a first journey, this is a first conversation, and I'm going to share my screen now with our first topic. And hopefully you are able to see the screen. Good, I see nodding heads. It's always a good sign. All right, well, we're going to talk in this first instance, and I'm going to try to be mindful of time, and I respect that many of you will have questions, but I will try to get through this because I want to get to some very practical sector examples, as well as talking about the current state right now. So here we go. This is going to be where the journey we're going to go on the first 50 minutes, the state of blockchain technology industry, energy, financial services, healthcare, supply chains. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but we are going to hit some high notes. So let's look at a few facts here. The numbers are getting bigger and bigger. You don't need much to know that actually the opportunity set has grown, not only across cryptocurrencies, but we are now talking about blockchain, the infrastructure of the technology permeating pretty much every sector and industry you can possibly think of. And what is unique about this technology is not just the mouthwatering numbers that you're seeing here, but also the fact that it is a collaborative technology, which actually requires a different cultural mindset. So in the old days, when the internet first began and companies were building their software, it was often I'm going to build it and then people will buy it. And that model has really been turned on its head because a lot of the technology requires collaboration. It actually requires a lot of atypical stakeholders and parties to work together. It's not just about government doing its own thing. It's not just about private sector doing its own thing. And you're going to hear this thematic over and over again. And the only way we're going to actually accelerate scaling and opportunities and do it the right way, where we actually create equitable solutions and opportunities, is to work together. And we see that opportunity set for Miami-Dade, as well as the rest of the United States and beyond. So take away these numbers as you see fit. I'm going to provide a lot of statistics for those of you who like numbers. You will hopefully be very pleased today. And we have another report here from Deloitte, which also said and answers the question, is blockchain for real? I've been in the space for about 10 years. And I will tell you, and I'm definitely one of the older veterans in the space, but I will tell you the question I constantly get, is this blockchain thing for real? Well, I can assure you it is. There are certain parts of the evolution that are accelerating faster. Others are taking more time because they are very much infrastructure level technology implementations. And so you may not see them move as quickly. So whether you're talking about cryptocurrencies or whether you're talking about enterprise blockchain, different groups are going at different speeds. And so it is not kind of one size fits all. But what we do see here, even from 2019 to 2020, we are seeing an increase in actual blockchain implementations and production level. So there's still experimenting going on, but the very fact that we're beginning to see the full production integration shows you the maturation of this technology. Still a lot of work to be done, still early days, but we're moving in the right direction. Now, I want to talk a little bit about data. Data and time as value. Data creation, data management, data storage, data security. Why all this about data? Well, ultimately, we're talking about digitizing pretty much everything. And in a world where we're digitizing everything, what are we going to do with all that data? And when that data is representing money, there's even more questions that come to fold. And that's ultimately what's going on with a lot of the conversations that are happening today. Data has become money. So when the internet first started, and we could move information around frictionlessly, AKA email. People didn't initially realize the value of that. But of course, today it's ubiquitous. If anything, most of us probably want less email, not more email. Well, one day through your chat group or your email like payments structure, there will be a way for you to move $10 with ease and probably little or no cost to somewhere halfway around the world, or to someone halfway around the world. When those things are evolving and are possible, it unlocks a whole nother opportunity set. And we are not there yet, but there are numerous use cases underneath that. And ultimately, we need to think about all of these things. Who creates the data? Who manages the data? Who stores the data, or what stores the data and maintains that securely? And what blockchain technology and different communities within the blockchain technology industry are doing are looking to solve for different aspects of that. And by the way, that includes all of us managing and owning our own data and having that prove that it's our data so that we have more control over it, whether it's our identity, whether it's something we create as an artist, whether it is something that we have that's personal, like health care records. These are all things of putting more control in the hands of the consumer. That's very important. And so I mentioned a number of sort of, progression over the next decade that I think, hopefully will happen. Again, these are just my views on where I think we may evolve, but these concepts are very big. Digital infrastructure, standardized digital superhighways. How do we work together when this technology is borderless? And how do we create standards like the internet became standard and effectively allowed everyone and anyone to access that? How do we help government actually create digital infrastructure to deliver better services? And today we are going to focus primarily there, but knowing how complicated systems are, technology is, that's legacy technology in particular, and it's critical infrastructure. You can't just take it out and replace it with something new without making sure that it is rock solid and critical. We need to realize that this stuff will take years, maybe even 5 years, a decade. So there is some level of patience and thoughtfulness that also needs to happen. I just wanted to give a sense to you all, for those of you who are not familiar with GBBC, we are a network of doers and people who are looking to scale the business of blockchain. We absolutely believe this is a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and we bring both Fortune 100s to government, to regulators, to startups you've never heard of in parts of the world that you've probably never visited together. And the reason why we believe that convening is so important is because we need the best and brightest minds from all walks of life to be able to work together to solve some of these critical problems. And so just to give you a sense of who have been involved in some of our summit discussions, and of course this year they were virtual, we did the best that we could, but we covered the APAC region, the EMEA region, as well as the Americas on 3 critical areas, which you see here. And these have been our thematics for all of 2021. And I would imagine they're also going to go into 2022. Digital infrastructure and digital economy. How do we help governments in particular look to standardize and scale that? Global standards and regulation. You've heard, many of you, the debates that have been going on now on Capitol Hill and beyond. It's not just DC, but actually many countries that are having these conversations about regulatory regimes or frameworks around not only cryptocurrencies, but digital assets in general. And then sustainable and resilient systems. We have all gone through a lot in the last 18 months. And I think what is critical here is that we have a mindset that if we're going to build new technologies or next generation Web3, as a lot of people are calling this, how do we do this better? we should not try to design the same old that excludes people, that is not as equitable as it could be. And I think that thoughtfulness on resiliency and sustainability, that also includes inclusion and also withstanding crises of any kind, financial and other, is really important. And I think these are topics that are being covered not just at the corporate level, but also at the government and startup level, of how people can help each other solve for some of these big problems and issues. And I want to just give some statistics here, because in case you are in doubt, I look at LinkedIn. I've been looking actually at LinkedIn for the last probably 7 years, since I was at CME Group running digitization. If you Googled search for blockchain worldwide back then, you probably got a couple hundred job opportunities, if anything, even back in like 2015. Look at November 3rd, 2019, with about 15,000 jobs, not just shy of 15,000. This was before COVID. Look at today. I did this actually very early this morning. 57,707 job opportunities. That's just LinkedIn worldwide. I looked at the US. The US is coming in at just under 21,000 of these jobs. And Florida, I did a little snapshot in the corner there, is coming in at 622. Mainly the first top ones all seem to be Accenture. So I guess Accenture is hiring a lot. But the point being here is we see these numbers growing, and there's no reason why blockchain jobs in Florida opportunities should not be in the thousands. We have over 270 institutional members in our network who are members of GBBC. And I will tell you, the number of job openings, people cannot hire enough. And it's not just developers. I agree, developers are a mint. And if you are a developer, if you can find a developer, hold on to that person. But we need marketers, we need communicators, we need legal folks, we need accountants, we need across the board. And that all of those skill sets are in demand. And so this is just to show that we're here and it will only get bigger. I expect 6-figure job opportunities worldwide in the next year. That would not surprise me at all. And that's just LinkedIn. So let's move on to sort of the more nitty-gritty stuff. For those of you who like definitions, I have borrowed from our GSMI, and there are a lot of links at the bottom of each of these slides, which will be available to all of you. Everything we do is public, so these documents are for you and as a resource. And we have not come up with them ourselves. We've actually leaned on other groups, other associations. What we have done through one of our big initiatives is to canvass the market for terminology. We've actually looked at what are definitions that people have come up with. And we have created here or pulled out here 2 that are, we believe, a good representation of what common definitions should be around blockchain and distributed ledger technology. Now, I think to make a clearing point here, I just want to say, sorry, I'll go back. All blockchains, are they DLT? So a distributed ledger technology is a system of digital records that enable independent, oh, I apologize for that. I don't know why it's moving around. Enables independent entities to establish a consensus around a shared ledger. So meaning you could get a group of people together to create a shared bookkeeping, record keeping system. And it could actually have just a handful of people that trust each other. And then they could come up with a consensus to figuring out how they might actually agree to confirming a transaction or a piece of data. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it is a blockchain. So you can have distributed ledger technologies that actually are not blockchain. And blockchain, based on the definition here from 2 different associations, it's really the database that places records of transaction into a block on a DLT network. And so this block system, which is this sort of like recording in chain and timestamping, is actually a critical feature of blockchain. And then securing that with cryptographic signatures. So I just want to make clear that just because someone says, I have a DLT solution, does not necessarily mean it's a blockchain solution. It could be, but we need to verify that. And for those of you who like graphics, and I'm a big fan of borrowing from folks we know in our network and our community, so I appreciate Standard Chartered for coming up with these graphics so I don't have to. But it just explains very simply in infographic form how a transaction might take place and be agreed. And I know it's a very simplified way to show it, but the idea is that party A and party B wish to enter into some sort of interaction. And by the way, it does not have to be financial. It could be a contract agreement or some sort of agreement in general, or a business process. And then both are given cryptographic keys. The interaction is broadcast to the network. The network then confirms through its whatever agreed method of consensus. Once that agreement and verification has happened, then it is put onto the blockchain, and then it becomes the golden source. Everyone's record is updated. And then what does that ultimately mean? It means it is now record for everyone to see, the transparency bit. So imagine doing that millions of times over. That would be very cool in certain instances. And we're going to start talking about the beauty of full transparency, but then some of the pitfalls, because let's face it, do you really want all of your financial transactions to be that transparent? Probably not. So we do actually need different layers of what we call transparency and access. But the basic point of blockchain, I think the takeaways that you guys should, if you're not familiar, is the verification, confirmation, timestamping, permanent record, and it's designed with security in mind. That's why it is better than potentially just a database, which is another question I get often, which is why can't I just use a database? Well, the short answer is you might. There may be instances where a database is just fine. We're not trying to throw out the database, but there's flexibility and there are certain elements of blockchain technology which also provide benefits beyond what a database can do. And here's another terminology that I use for folks, and regulators tend to like this a lot, but most people don't think of it this way. Blockchain technology as a risk mitigation tool. If you are in any industry that needs to have real-time data that is accurate, and I come from a banking background and a derivative markets background, and I went through the financial crisis. And I will tell you, not having clarity on what the mark-to-market on my derivatives positions was a real problem across entire segments of the firm, or the London office versus the New York office. You would have thought that we would have that level of clarity, but it was very difficult and it was awfully manual. And I would actually argue today, with all of the increased regulation and capital requirements, it's improved a bit, but the systems are probably no better. And frankly, we need a systems upgrade to provide better real-time data access, where not only does the London office have it, but the New York office, and then potentially even the regulator of a given group of banks, as an example. So I think we have a long way to go. And to me, that's just one area where when you think about blockchain technology as a risk mitigation tool, it can help mitigate fraud, provide real-time access to risk management, actual risk management of markets and positioning, and also allow for people to make faster decisions because they're armed with that accurate, good information, especially in time of crisis. So I'm going to turn to blockchain for enterprise for a minute, because I think there's often a lot of criticism and pushback by some of the blockchain purists in the public domain who say, private, permissioned, so not, what blockchain's meant to be for. And I think this is one where I try to take a very neutral approach, which is Every problem is different, and one should always start with, what problem are you solving? And if that problem you are solving requires multi-stakeholders, and it does need to be held confidentially, and a lot of this comes up in the financial services world, but it also, by the way, comes up in energy and healthcare when you're talking about healthcare records. You can't just broadcast stuff out there. You just can't. It's not reasonable to do so. So maybe there are use cases and instances where a small group of collaborators across different entities do need to share information, and it should be permissioned and it should be private. Now, having said that, the public, full transparency, full open access has its merits as well, as we've seen with Bitcoin and Ethereum. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a later segment. So I'll leave that here, which is for certain enterprises, this permissioned, distributed, private DLT world may make more sense. And I don't think it's all one size fits all. So I'm only showing this here because I'm not picking winners. This is just to give you a sense. We're not talking about the blockchain. We're talking about many blockchains, and they keep proliferating. Maybe for very good reason, because some of them tackle different problem sets. And so what I think is very difficult for someone coming in, very recently, is trying to understand all the different blockchains that are out there. And by the way, the next question that logically comes up is, do they talk to each other? Because if they don't talk to each other and I build on one, then am I stuck? Is it almost like vendor lock? There are solutions being worked on, often called layer 2, where interoperability and AKA blockchains talking to each other or being able to interact with each other are being worked on. But the world of many blockchains is probably growing and needs to eventually filter out where we end up with a handful. I don't think we end up in a world where there's only one blockchain. It's very clear that there are use cases that work for some better than others, and some are private, some are completely open. And in the case of, for example, Zcash and Monero, those are private, completely obfuscated transactions, and have their own sort of reason for why they are being used, versus ones that are completely open like Bitcoin or Ethereum. So again, I think I'm just showing you here that there are quite a few different types. And I've missed your blockchain. I apologize. I will, if you ping me, I will add your logo to the deck. I always get someone telling me I missed their blockchain. So let's talk about major trends. This has been ongoing for several years. I've actually not changed this very much, and it continues. It's going mainstream across industries, that's clear. We're going to cover a lot of that. Government and regulatory engagement, yeah, it's picking up. Here we are today. This is a prime example of the collaboration, partnership, and conversations we have. And then the geographic distribution and growth. I will tell you one thing. Do not underestimate how pervasive this technology is. I used to travel 90% of my time before COVID. I would go anywhere in the world, tweet out that I was there, and I would always find somebody who was working on a project. It was pretty incredible. There's probably not a country I've been to in the last 5-6 years where I didn't meet someone new who was working on a project. It is an incredible global community. Young, old, all kinds of walks of life, educated, not so educated. I mean, it's just incredible. And I think people underestimate what that geographic reach from a community culture standpoint gives strength to blockchain and crypto. So keep that in mind. And of course, with everything, there are risks and benefits. I'm not going to rattle off all of these things to you, but I'm just going to highlight a couple risks that I do see. We're already beginning to see the regulatory and jurisdictional arbitrage. If we don't encourage our legislators and regulators to work together to look at more cohesive or collaborative regulation, we will end up very much like the financial services industry has, which is jurisdictional arbitrage. And I think that's actually to the detriment of a technology like this, where people will go where it's most lenient, for example, and that's not necessarily a good thing. I'm less worried, by the way, about the interoperability of blockchains. I think that solution is being worked on by lots of great minds. And so to me, it's really sort of the regulatory and jurisdictional arbitrage issues where people might go where it's easier to do business, right? So, or skirt regulations. So I think that's sort of a risk that we're looking at right now. And I have below here GAFA, which I refer to as Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and I include Alibaba. It's not because I think, these companies are awful, but I would like a world where we didn't recreate 5 companies that control everything. I think we really have the opportunity here to make it hubs around the world where there are many hubs, not just New York and London and Silicon Valley, but actually multiple cities, multiple areas, from rural to urban. And so I hope that we will all endeavor to make sure that we're mindful of that opportunity set for many. And then I want to highlight a couple big industry, and I mentioned before standardization about industry. We launched a initiative called the Global Standards Mapping Initiative. It's completely free and open. We collaborated and partnered with the World Economic Forum last year and other industry leaders. We mapped 185 jurisdictions and found 379 industry groups working on blockchain globally. And then we mapped 30 plus, or actually 34 to be exact, technical standards. And we will be continuing this work, or we are continuing this work called GSMI 2.0 with even more folks involved. And what are we doing? We're saying, look, where are we when it comes to legal, regulatory, and technical standards? We're not writing the standard necessarily, we're just literally mapping what is going on because there's such a beehive of activity. And so if you are interested, the website link is down below and you can take a look. It's pretty cool. There's an interactive map where you can hover over it. And we've even gotten every state. So if you hover over the state, you can actually find the laws, the bills, things that have been put out by different agencies so that if you're doing research, it's a good tool to start with. And then I'm going to cover industry groups because I think it's really important for us to, industry categories. And I think it's really important for us to think about what's actually being, what are some of the major changes that are going on. I would love to talk about education, but because I had to pick a handful and we are covering government later, I'm going to cover right now energy, financial services, healthcare, and supply chain. There are major categories I think are also very important to the Florida state and local industry. And frankly, there are lots of opportunities in all of these categories. Let's start with energy. Use cases in the energy sector. I think many of you might have heard P2P trading. People are looking at different ways to potentially use cryptocurrencies in energy. Some of those use cases have come up. There's a lot of experimenting going on right now, and obviously it's another highly regulated industry, and therefore there are laws that sometimes need to be changed in order for things to happen. But whether we're talking about retail or wholesale, we are finding that there are use cases across the board. And I'm just going to highlight some of the companies and some of the areas that we've seen in recent time, but I'm sure there are many more that I'm not going to be able to highlight today. So these are just to give you a sense of what some of the use case categories are. The benefits for a lot of people are benefits you're going to find and hear through a lot of the industry sets, which are lowering cost of transaction, reducing bureaucracy, helping to gain affordable energy, actually smoothing out, by the way, blackouts is another one that's been discussed. How do we actually, able to make sure that we switch to different energy sources depending on whether we're using a lot or their peak loads versus other periods of time when the energy usage is lower. A lot of these different conversations are being had very actively. And so I think, again, greenfield opportunities across the board. I have a lot of logos here. This is just to illustrate to you how vast and different, and this is just a subset of companies that are working around the world Some are startups. You've probably never heard of some of these, and some are brand names. And it also includes the Department of Energy in the US. So there are lots of different agencies, groups, corporates working with startups to solve for different elements of the energy sector. And here's one on wholesale trading. Unless you're actually in the energy space, most people probably are not so familiar with wholesale trading and who the players are that actually dominate the wholesale energy markets. But this is just a small window into the fact that it's actually not a huge group of folks who control most of wholesale energy trading. And they actually got together to create an entity called VACT, V-A-K-T. And that startup was basically streamlining energy market trading using blockchain as its backbone. And that company actually got bought out, I think about a year or two ago. But that was an initiative of some of the biggest wholesale energy traders out there in the world, created this particular startup. And I say startup very carefully because it was very well funded from day one. I'm going to move on to financial services just because obviously we've got time on limitations on our side. A lot of people talk about banking and payment rails. It's a hot topic and it's one that deserves attention because I think all of us would like to be able to send money around without getting hit up with wire fees and any kind of fee charges, especially if you try to send money abroad, cross-border. I remember talking to a friend in Jamaica. Even between Jamaica and BVI, she used to send money home, living in BVI to Jamaica. 15% gets taken out of $100, $15 out of $100. How is that fair? To me, there are numerous areas for us to improve, not just timing, like getting our money faster, but let's face it, cross-border, it's still too expensive. I can't send $100 without losing 15 of it. It just doesn't seem right. And even if it's down to now $10, there are still systems available that can make it cheaper. And we need to get to a place where that regulatory environment, where the KYC AML, all the regulatory requirements are still there and in place to protect the consumer and obviously prevent terrorism or other sorts of bad actors from being able to move money around. But we need for the average consumer to be able to get their money faster and cheaper. It's simple as that. But the problem itself is very complicated. And there are many, many companies working on payment rails, including traditional enterprises, as well as your cryptocurrency networks. So when we talk about data, this is what I call post-trade, the back end of financial services, which for a lot of people is a big snooze fest, where data is confirmed, data is recorded, data is transferred when it needs to be. I spent a lot of time in this post-trade space. It is critical. It is not always the most exciting, but it is where often the most disasters occur from a back end conflict standpoint. What do I mean by that? Well, let's put it to you this way. When a transaction fails, there are usually dozens of people then have to run around, figure out where's the money? Why didn't it go to B when it left A? It's still difficult. And if there's a digit off or something didn't happen the way it should, or there was a collateral failure, there are all sorts of issues where today's systems, because they're not cohesive and they don't actually always represent real-time data, causes all kinds of frictions. And so the reason why a lot of financial services folks are particularly interested in post-trade, it's not necessarily because they're going to make revenues, new revenues off of this. Maybe the startups will, but for a lot of the big banks, and real estate companies and some of the big behemoths, insurance companies, it's really around, can we reduce that cost? If I have to spend $1 billion a year on this back end stuff, can I actually get it down to 600 million? It's as simple as that. And the numbers are big when you add everything up. I'm going to talk about insurance. Might also be a snooze fest for some people, but it's often where some big greenfield opportunities can come. There are different types of insurance innovation going on right now. So in one bucket, you've got innovation of insurance companies trying to streamline their own processes, and that's a separate bucket. But then you've got startups like Evertas that are actually trying to offer different types of insurance, including D&O and theft, et cetera, to the crypto space. The crypto space has now gotten so big, multi-trillion, that it actually needs insurance. And there's a huge gap between the insurance, reinsurance markets and what the growth of the cryptocurrency industry. And I don't know how closely many of you follow what goes on in the world today, but in terms of theft and loss, but it's pretty much every day. There are actually newsletter groups. If you're interested, let me know. I'll ping you their Twitter handle. They actually categorize and list every week all the thefts and losses that have happened around the world in the crypto space. And in DeFi, it's becoming also quite a big problem. And where are you going to go if you lose your crypto? If you're lucky, you have insurance. If you're lucky, you're covered, but it's doubtful that you probably are. And so these solutions are coming. It's a huge opportunity for a handful of firms like Evertas. And the survey here shows how underserved this market is at the moment. And insurance, as any of you know who are in insurance, moves very slowly and very conservatively. And so this is probably multi-years in the making before we see a big evolution in the space. Or something bad will happen, really catastrophic, and it will jumpstart everyone into action. But I think it's more likely it's going to be a slow grind. And then I'm going to leave you with this one. I think most people are familiar with Libra announcing, and then they changed their name to DM. They were originally Swiss, now they're American, and it looks like they may or may not be able to launch. I think many people will have a field day making case studies about how this was the absolute wrong way to launch a crypto or a stable coin. But I think the takeaway I would take from this is not the failure or potential failure of this initiative, but what it actually represented. Facebook has over 2 billion in their social network. That's over 2.2 billion people to tap into. That is bigger than any country in the world, even bigger than India and China. And so when you think about the power of social networks, and now you're going to move value through those social networks, it's something that I think has raised eyebrows, not only to government, but also to everyone who thinks, wow, wait a minute. There are going to be entire economies forming and building within these networks. It's already happening. And then the question is, who has the guardrails around this, or who's going to actually help make sure that these things grow in a positive manner and not be a free-for-all? And if they get big enough, what is the impact to global monetary policy, to individual country monetary policy? And these are all sorts of questions that are now coming into play. So I think it's a pretty significant thing for us to not forget about, no matter what happens to DM. I'm going to move on to healthcare. I'm sure there are tons of questions and people are wanting me to stop, but I really do want to get through this because we can always take questions offline. So healthcare. I don't think there are enough startups working in healthcare. I'm just going to put it out there. I know healthcare is highly regulated, it's complex, and there are a number of use cases that we could be looking at, everything from licensing and credentialing to data management, to invoicing, payment reconciliation, supply chain. A lot of people have also talked about how do we make sure that medication or vaccines are, truly what they are and not fake or fraudulent. How do we make sure that we have self-sovereign ownership of our own health records? Can blockchain do all of that? Yes and no. And we have lots of different groups working on different solutions. Many of you know Pfizer, but then many of you may not know some of these other smaller startups that have started working on different parts of whether it's healthcare records or supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. I personally have not seen enough. I think we need to see more healthcare startups. I think there needs to be more funding going to healthcare. startups. And I think this is one area where I personally feel a lot of personal interest in. I'm also the Yale Alumni Health Network tech chair. So I focus on the intersection between health and medical professionals and tech. And we're spending a lot of time on how do we encourage more innovation, not just blockchain, but more innovation on the digitization of the healthcare sector, as well as making sure that we deliver better services to the individual and alleviate the burden to medical professionals. I mean, that's the number one thing I hear from nurses and doctors today, is just the sheer burden of the admin and the bureaucracy. They should be focusing on taking care of people and patients. This is where we have some real anomalies and opportunity. So Viral Cure is a project I just want to highlight that came out of the pandemic out of Brazil. They raised $17 million last year in the middle of, Brazil was very hard hit, right? They raised $17 million in a crowdfunding initiative to basically, in collaboration with the major public hospital in Brazil, with a blockchain company and several universities, including one of the main ones in Sao Paulo. And they managed to raise this money to help the hospital make investments in what is critically needed. It's very unusual for Brazil. This was like the first time they'd ever done this. And people get to vote on what gets invested. That was the unique piece of this, is not only did you put money in, or donate, but you then had a voting right to say where things should go. Not to say that the outcome would work in your favor always, but the point being is you actually had a say in that investment. And so this is a very interesting experiment, if you think about it, from something out of a very difficult situation. Money got raised for a hospital, and then on top of that, they incorporated a way for the average person to have a say in where the money got spent, and then the ensuing transparency behind that. So I just wanted to highlight that to you. It occurred last year in 2020, and they're continuing to evolve the app and the services that they're offering, as well as the voting. And then I'm going to move on finally to supply chain and round this out. This is a common thematic as well, which is our current system might have in any given supply chain lots of different intermediaries. I've looked at actually airline parts with Boeing, and there are probably 60 intermediaries in a given supply chain for a single part or a group of parts. It's extraordinary. These large airline companies like Boeing, deal with hundreds and hundreds of different intermediaries. And those intermediaries, by the way, may have intermediaries or third parties that they work with. And so the transparency of who is who and what goes from point A to point C to point Z is completely opaque in certain instances. And the idea of blockchain in the many use cases that I've heard is just opening up the transparency on where things are, so that you as an end user, whether you're Nestle, you want to know where your chocolate is in production, to Boeing, you want to know where your engine part is, can actually see it across the entire life cycle of a given product set. And it's difficult because a lot of these are commodities. They're not finished products. It starts with a commodity with something in the ground and goes all the way across. But the idea is that you start shining light on different pieces of that supply chain, and then hopefully over time, you can actually shine light on end to end. There are a number of different sub-use cases within supply chain that I think are super interesting. We talked to one of the big metals and mining guys out of Australia who actually were very interested in identity management. Do you know why? Well, they have people going on to their sites all the time. Contractors, surveyors, truck drivers, you name it. And the credentials may be legitimate or may be expired. And the system right now is still very much manual. Someone kind of looks at it on site, but nobody from HQ would have a clue if that person's credentials got revoked and shouldn't be there. And so there's some very interesting sort of remote identity management, credentialing topics, even within the people management piece. And then obviously you get a bit more sophisticated with potentially tokenization of things for loyalty and gaming and digital money potentially. But there are a lot of different areas within supply chain. The category that I like a lot is actually, as you can imagine, safety, security, and regulation. I think anything, again, blockchain as a risk mitigation tool, anything that can help with shining light on better data so that anyone who's managing the risk around systems can manage and make decisions faster is something we should be investing in. And so, again, I think there are numerous sub-use cases here within not only the airline industry, but pretty much anyone who's got a supply chain. And I'm going to highlight this one because no one in the US talks about this enough, and it will become a problem for the US eventually and the Americas, which is there is a Silk and Belt and Road initiative going on where if you look at the trade, it goes from China into Russia, into Europe, and all throughout Africa, Middle East, or part of Africa and Middle East, and India even, and Southeast Asia. And guess who's missing? All of the Americas. This is a state-of-the-art trading route that they're creating with digital infrastructure in mind. I sit on the AIFC, which is the Kazakhstan FinTech Council, and I have gotten a lot of great information about the focus on this as they build this out. It is land, it is sea, and digital infrastructure is absolutely part of the plan. Does it also include a digital like CBDC or a digital currency? Probably, but the point being is the information sharing, the point A to point B to point C will be on common infrastructure, which will most likely be blockchain of some kind, and therefore give an unparalleled insight into travel of any item in this network once they're done. So I think we have competition when it comes from a US standpoint on multiple different levels. And the US needs to take a step up in accelerating its digital infrastructure access and usage, because this is coming. Beyond 2021, this has been mentioned before, how do we harness blockchain for common good? At what point does it become a utility where we allow for open and low to no cost infrastructure access? How do we allow anyone and everyone to use this? And there are ways for us to do that. Apologies. We need to partner with lots of different stakeholders, including government here, as well as entrepreneurs and academia and legal folks. We need to figure out how we create a proliferation of innovation hubs and mass scale knowledge transfer. We need the universities and the academic centers because we also need the skills for the next generation of talent that's going to be required, or skills that are going to be required. And so I call them digital gardeners just because we need to plant seeds all over the US, including Miami-Dade County. And we need to start with schools all the way through to career changers. And I think we need to make sure that we include everyone in this conversation, or as many people who are interested. And let's keep the UN Sustainable Development Goals in mind. I think these are great benchmarks for how we compare and calibrate how we're building. Are we building things that actually help reduce inequalities? And if you look at any of the SDGs, there are guidance behind each one of these. And I think every single one of us, it behooves us to think about, if I'm building a product set or I'm designing a system, how many of these do I actually achieve? I think it's a great way just to make sure that you're aligning and building something that's going to be as beneficial to society as possible. And then beyond that, oh, this seems to be an errant slide, so I apologize. It belongs in another section, but I am going to end it here because I think I've now moved on to the next section.
Thank you, Sandra, for that thorough review and for providing your thoughts on the basics of blockchain. To be mindful of time, we'll be answering your questions in the next Q&A slot. We went a little bit above time. Having said that, I would like to introduce our next speaker. His name is Bill Rockwood. He's the Deputy Legislative Director for Congressman Darren Soto for Florida District 9, who's also the chair of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus. Bill is the Executive Director of the Congressional Future Forum, and he also serves as the chair of the blockchain project team at the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. Bill will be providing the federal and congressional update segment. Mr. Rockwood, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alfredo. Well, first of all, I really appreciate being here today. I should make one comment, standard government fare, that I'm here on my own personal capacity, and my comments do not necessarily reflect that of Congressman Soto, the Congressional Blockchain Caucus, the Future Forum, or the Academic Research Institute. So that said, I have a couple things to, it's a little bit of a hectic time in the ecosystem. And so I want to make a couple different points today. Four main things I'm going to talk about is the importance of people right now. I'll give a little bit of context of who I am, what the congressman does in a federal capacity as chairman or one of the co-chairs of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus, some of the things going on, and I imagine a decent number of people are going to want to talk about the infrastructure provision that got in 2 weeks ago. So let's start there. I know that's probably where the concentration of questions is going to be, but I want to acknowledge that a lot of effort has been developing in this ecosystem already. You know, on both the federal level, I think the private sector is a huge leader in this space generally. And a big role of mine is just to try to help facilitate that conversation on the public side as well. So while this is in the news and up front and center these days, a lot of this has taken place over the last few years. And I wanted to start out with a little personal anecdote and just say why people are so important right now. You know, the person that introduced me, Alfredo, is a great friend. And he was actually an intern in the Congressional, in Representative Soto's office. And, you know, we were active, I think it was about 3 years ago, and I just sort of offhandedly mentioned blockchain, that blockchain was coming, you know, just to, you know, I suggested just looking into it a little bit. And I just want to commend Alfredo for going above and beyond. And he actually took that initiative and got a certificate in blockchain, then went to the global blockchain, I'm gonna mess up the name, and just so much of this really comes down to that initiative and connecting the dots. You know, you can make the parallel of nodes within a blockchain infrastructure, but I just want to highlight that personal story, that one piece of just an offhanded comment one day from me. You know, Alfredo really took to heart, internalized, and is already doing great things. So I really want to stress that, because we are a new industry that's kind of up and coming. So first of all, thank you, Alfredo, for helping highlight that point. But I think a lot of, as a new sector, you know, a lot of discussion kind of tends to focus on the technical side. And I think it's incredibly important. You know, there's a huge educational barrier, particularly in Congress right now, as we witnessed in the last few weeks. But I really want to focus on the people side of things, that, you know, these relationships are what facilitate these discussions. It's all about education. You know, a lot of us in the crypto and blockchain ecosystem kind of started off last few years. We were the, you know, the crazy ones, or the rogue innovators is the phrase I like to use. But we're finally at a point where, you know, it's so hard to get attention for these issues, but finally people are starting to pay attention. So not only do we need to stress the technical aspects and help educate new incoming policymakers, we also need to be aware that that human element is what binds us, that we don't have to advocate for ourselves to draw eyes on these issues. And it's really kind of the people side that we need to focus on. We have so many great technical experts, and I think the next step in really advancing these things are going to be those interpersonal interactions. And why I'm staying on this so much is I think the crypto and blockchain industry has so many great innovators, but when they tend to speak to policymakers, or, you know, Bitcoin gets brought up, they want to go straight into the most complicated issue there is. And I enjoy those conversations personally, but just working on these things in the last 4 years or so on the Hill, there isn't much of a knowledge base in which to have those conversations. So my biggest takeaway today, as there are more eyes on this ecosystem, is you really have to meet people where they are in having this conversation. You know, if someone doesn't, you know, they heard of Dogecoin for the very first time, you know, that's a hot topic among people in this space, but you have to be willing to meet people where they are. And sometimes you have to, what I call reverse engineer the conversation, that you have to sometimes lead with a use case and then then say how the technology can help facilitate something they're interested in. So a lot of policymakers want to reduce healthcare costs or improve supply chain security. Like, we all know these things that blockchain is great at, but I think sometimes you have to breadcrumb those use cases for policymakers and start with those things, find out what they care about. You know, I think Miami's done a great job in leading the space, but, you know, not everyone's going to be that industrious in taking the lead and educating themselves. So as we grow as an ecosystem, I really suggest, as these conversations go further and further, don't be hostile if somebody doesn't know things, and maybe help connect the dots for them. So why should you believe me in that space? I'll give a little bit of background. Congressman Soto is the co-chair of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus. So this has existed for about 5 or 6 years with its primary goal of educating members of Congress, but also providing a hub for the public, the private sector, and academia in which to discuss these things, with the idea that the technology is going to occur and develop. You know, the analogy of the early days of the internet is often used. So the Blockchain Caucus exists as kind of a forum where, you know, we want to promote a light touch regulatory response where we're balancing innovation and consumer protection. But really, the most fundamental job is educating members of Congress. So just some of the background on what we do as an office. I'll really highlight 2 things. So a lot of the discussion that takes front and center in this policy ecosystem are bills or pieces of legislation that are introduced. Typically, bills are very hard to pass, especially when there is that educational gap. You know, we introduced several of our first crypto bills 3 to 4 years ago, but the first bill that passed the House didn't actually occur until late last year. And I'm proud to say that 2 of those were bills that the congressman introduced himself, and we helped kind of guide through the committee and you know, floor structure. But there were a lot of political obstacles, and that we had to, you know, stay eager. And why do we care? Why do we care? You know, a lot of times members, the first they hear about it, they want to talk about some of the negative things that might come out in the news, the anti-money laundering, the energy consumption. So you just have to anticipate some of those, but also use them as pivot points to having a larger discussion. And yes, those are things that are of concern, but you also have to know that the example I use is for anti-money laundering, a blockchain is an unalterable system once it's in the blockchain. So that's actually an educational point where you say a lot of the original subpoenas and the Russian hacking incident came because the transactions occurred in Bitcoin, and they could trace the network to those ultimate transactions. So these things are just tools in a broader structure, but the way the technology is built is ultimately a very, very positive thing. That, you know, financial inclusion, the potential of the use cases. And a lot of times people are going to come in with a negative perception, but you have to use those opportunities to help communicate some of the core strengths of what blockchain is. This structures data. Ultimately, proof of stake networks are going to be very environmentally friendly. And the fact that it's an unalterable digital ledger ultimately promotes cybersecurity, accountability, transparency, all of these things. The other thing I'll highlight is why bills get a majority of the attention. The thing that everyone needs to be aware about is called the appropriations process. the debt ceiling and all those things have been in the news a lot recently, but a federal budget passes each year. And of that, members of Congress kind of allocate, that's a constitutional responsibility of theirs, that they help dictate where that money goes, how much each agency gets, and what that money is to be spent on. Now, while agencies are largely autonomous once they get the funding, one thing our office has been highly, highly successful with that I think is an underutilized path is helping encourage these agencies that if, hey, let's just throw out some hypothetical numbers. Hey, Department of Federal Drug Administration, of this $100 million you're getting for food contamination tracking, we suggest using 2 million of it to develop a pilot program that uses blockchain to trace contaminated food. That's the example that's the furthest along right now, in that we went from encouraging a feasibility study to a pilot, and now the FDA is off and running. And it's all about connecting the technology to the use case it addresses. And just knowing that instead of, we use the contaminated lettuce story as kind of the political springboard. And instead of, all they could find, it took 6 months to identify that the source of the contamination was an Arizona farm. And so what happened? They had to destroy all the lettuce in Arizona. That's a highly inefficient result, both in the time and in the destruction purposes, where if you added a blockchain layer, they could have traced it to a specific farm and a specific tract of land where you can isolate the contagion risk and also only destroy that particular plot that was the source of the problem. So now we'll try to bring this in for a landing, and those are the broader points. And I know a lot of the attention is on the infrastructure bill, and I'm happy to talk about that and take questions, but that is kind of the precursor to where things have been in the last 3 to 4 years, where we've really been trying to connect use cases to the benefits of blockchain. And then we kind of went a 0 to 100 very quickly the last couple of weeks when a provision was snuck into the infrastructure bill. Even the original introducer of the provision has acknowledged at this point they were not happy with the drafting. It had some unintended consequences. And I think ultimately no one was happy with the result. So let's talk about the positives and the negatives. That I think the silver lining in all of it is it's an acknowledgement that crypto and blockchain is here to stay. This is probably the biggest must-pass bill of this administration in this current year. And cryptocurrency took up front and center and actually delayed the final passage of the infrastructure package as a whole for a day or two. So these things were debated behind closed doors. Unfortunately, the politics of it didn't work out. Multiple amendments were offered, but just some procedural quirks ultimately meant none of those improved amendments were accepted. So while that was discouraging, I think the advocates within the industry see it as an opportunity to further educate, because that's what happened, where a probably ill-advised drafting version was ultimately incorporated without all the unintended consequences being understood. So on the back end, it became a week-long educational effort where I think you have every single senator has at least heard of cryptocurrency now. Their education levels are all over the place, but that is a very positive step. So where do we go from here? That I think, even as the original drafters would admit, it has unintended consequences, but there are still 3 more steps before that becomes a law. It has to be voted on in the House. It has to be interpreted by the IRS and the Treasury Department, and it has to be signed by the president. So my boss has said that we are committed to working with other members of the House. We've been on multiple letters to House leadership asking that, a number of things, that either this provision be removed or amended, or, just that it be considered. I think politically that may be tough right now, because any changes that are made to the underlying bill have to then go back to the Senate. And, be approved there too. So I think there is broad support for an amended provision. I think it just gets politically tricky in that if ultimately it isn't modified, it's for other political reasons than the underlying issue of crypto itself. I think there is an understanding that it's a flawed provision at this point. And then the second step, if it was signed and made into law, is that Treasury and the IRS have to interpret this provision. So even if this is signed into law, there is that'll probably take a year or two. And there are a lot of advocacy efforts in which we can encourage Treasury and the IRS to interpret this language in a certain way. And I think there's a lot of language and a lot of speeches on the floor, even from the original amendment folks, that, nodes and software developers and miners should not be included. So while that's not in the language itself, I think there's a lot of a track record of legislative intent that hopefully Treasury will incorporate into their interpretation of this provision. And my last comment will just be that my boss, Representative Soto, and the Blockchain Caucus are working on several things behind the scenes to help open up the amendment process and encourage this modification to occur. And we've also submitted both the Wyden amendment and the ultimate compromise amendment to Legislative Council, who's responsible for drafting these provisions, and that we will be pursuing both an amendment strategy and a standalone bill strategy, that even if the ultimate infrastructure passes as written, there will be bills introduced that say the corrected compromise amendment. So I know we covered a lot of ground, but I'll just end on people again. I think Alfredo provided a great example of that, and it's a really dynamic system, but we also have to have a lot of stick-to-itiveness that we have to work together. That there are a lot of great advocacy groups out there, including those represented on the call, but we have to present a united front, especially in this time window where there are so many educational gaps, and just those continuing messaging efforts and discussions like this are so important right now, and that we have to work together. The ecosystem itself is bigger than one staffer, one member of Congress, one commissioner of a executive agency. And I think our greatest inhibitor right now is if people don't work together and try to be the one person that fixes it all. I don't think that's possible. Crypto's too big, it shows too much promise. And it's only in our collaboration that we can really accelerate these efforts. And working together, hopefully these things will happen much quicker. And if we don't work together, I think they ultimately will happen, but that time frame will be much longer. So thank you for listening today, and happy to take any questions or defer to those till the end.
Bill, thank you so much. I have a question for you. How can local, you're working for a Florida office in DC. How can local governments support blockchain initiatives at the federal level? How can my colleagues can do that?
Yeah, and first of all, I should have acknowledged the local versus federal divide, and that I think the states and local government really are the innovators. That's how our democratic system was built, that the states would be the, I forgot what the phrase was used, but the laboratories of innovation. And I think Florida really has shined a lot. And I'm super proud to work for a Florida member who's taken the lead on this. And I think Miami in particular has shined the brightest in the past year. And that it really is a partnership. I think to go back to my budget discussion, a lot of federal dollars and federal grants and federal research and development initiatives can be created. I don't think the federal government should be the sole actor in this space, that it should be a collaboration where maybe you set a federal floor for some of these issues that, all, and this is hypothetically speaking and not necessarily an endorsement of these particular things, that all exchanges should have this base layer of consumer protection provisions. But where the government, local governments come in is really to work with federal actors on these. It is a collaborative process. I work a lot with local governments and what grants would be available. I think a lot of private money is going to move in. I think Miami's done a great job, but the federal government can also do write a lot of grant initiatives, encourage executive agencies to incorporate these technologies. So it's really a combination of federal, state, local, and the private sector. And I think sometimes the federal government can play a coordination role in all that maybe it helps with some grant dollars, but it really is going to be the states and the local governments who are the implementers. Miami's in the lead right now, and we hope to continue to encourage that. But it really does need to be a partnership where we can create federal dollars, and maybe there could be some state matching provisions, or ultimately it's going to be places like Miami that apply for these grants. So that's where I really see the partnership.
Thank you so much, Bill. Yeah, and I agree with you. I believe that, my colleagues at the local government level, it is a matter of asking our members of Congress, representatives at the state level, commissioners, what's happening? What are you doing, to understand blockchain, and how can blockchain benefit, how can we work so blockchain can benefit our constituents? It's a matter of asking to, our local government officials, state officials, and federal officials to be included in the conversation and to ask questions.
Yeah. If I can add one more thing to that, I think the infrastructure bill was great in that a lot of individual constituents made their voices heard. There were a lot of calls to members of Congress and senators, and that's great. I think the next step is for local government officials to further bring these things up. That, the more members of Congress and mayors hear about these things from people, it really reinforces the importance of these things. So even just bringing these up in a conversation with your member of Congress and saying these are important, I think further highlights and reinforces how the potential of these, because I think that's the biggest thing that's not understood at the federal level is the potential. And I think Miami's the perfect communicator for that right now, because it's already experienced some of that. So I just highly encourage constituents to stay active in their advocacy, but also for local members of government to continue having these conversations, bring up potential of crypto and blockchain. And it really drives home the point of the future that these technologies have.
Bill, thank you so much for joining. I know we have a couple of questions in the Q&A chat. To remind everyone, if you have a question, just submit it via that Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. Because of time, we'll jump into the next segment. Bill, I believe there may be a couple of questions that you can address via the Q&A chat, or can also be addressed offline if necessary. Having said that, Bill, thank you so much. We'll jump ahead to the next segment about real-world use cases and applications, and I will leave Sandra again. Sandra, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you, Alfredo and Bill. Always great to share the stage or a virtual stage. I'm going to share my screen here. Part 2. And I appreciate all of the amazing questions that have come in. I tried to answer some of them by writing to you all. So I hope you are seeing that. And I see quite a few questions about Miami Coin, City Coin. So I will try to do my best, but I certainly think we all need to do a little bit more digging around what the specifics are around that. But I will try to cover that in the crypto section. Right now, we're talking about some real world use cases focusing on government. So many of you may have heard of this already. It's not really new, but one of the think tanks in DC, Pew, comes out with a government trust survey, and we're still at pretty low levels of Americans trusting federal, I'm making this clear, federal government to do what is right. And I think part of the issue we have is around people feeling trust in the institutions that are meant to take care of X, whatever that may be. And how do we go about trying to support that through tech? Well, I think one of the many areas where blockchain has stepped in, or the conversation around blockchain and government has stepped in, is really around how do we increase transparency, assurances, don't believe the government official or the politician, but actually here is the data, here is the accountability, and that in turn fosters increased trust in government over time. None of these solutions could possibly be panaceas for overnight instant trust, beyond a 50% mark. I think this is about how do we instill steady transparency, accountability, and increased security, by the way, to enable that trust to grow, whether it is at the federal level, the state level, or the local government level. And we're going to talk a little bit about certain groups that are doing that, and then also some very specific US, local, and state use cases that we found. I will, before going on, make one comment, which is I scoured the market. I talked to lots of people in the last few weeks about the latest in GovTech and the latest at the local state levels. And guess what? We don't have enough going on. And we need to help local politicians, local government leaders to enable more pilots and experimenting. We need to have this flourish. I found the few that I'm going to highlight today, but we need more. That's all I'm going to say about that. And you've seen the slide before. I'm now moving on to the government section. We're going to talk about upgrading systems, information sharing. There's also the digital identity piece, potentially data privacy, and also concerns around surveillance. So we'll touch upon a few of those things. But I'm going to start with Estonia. And why on earth would I start with a tiny little country that's part of the EU, by the way, but it's former Soviet Union, territory? Well, here's the thing. They've been on a digital roadmap for their entire government since the late 1990s. And they have adopted, and I know it says blockchain adopted in 2008. They technically adopted it in 2012, but I think they were talking about it from early days of a DLT solution as opposed to a blockchain. This report came from PwC on Estonia. And I want to highlight here one of the critical things. So they basically have everything on their government e-services except for marriage, divorce, and real estate transactions, apparently. But there are many things that they offer. And this is coming from the officials, so you'll have to question what their methodology is for calculating this. But they estimate that they save 1,400 years of working time and 2% of GDP because of this infrastructure. It's pretty astounding. And we are very fortunate to say at the GBBC that we know former President Tuomas Henrik Ilves. He's our ambassador to Estonia, actually. And he's the one who, when he was leader, actually started this digital journey. And this digital journey has now allowed for a KSI blockchain to be implemented. And again, I said it's 2012 when they actually implemented this. And it encompasses verification, not the actual information, but verification on blockchain for their healthcare registry, their property registry, their business registry, their succession registry, their digital court system, and even their state gazette, apparently. So you can find out a lot more about Estonia in the report that I've attached here. But I just think it's very interesting to see what can happen when an entire government leadership decides to implement digital infrastructure. And by the way, when he introduced this concept, he got vilified. He was told he was crazy. There was tons of pushback. There were lots of angry people. People did not want the change, and it took a while. I mean, he started in the late 90s. But the point being is today, they are now reaping the benefits, both financially and saving bureaucracy and time in doing this. And from my own personal experience, I am an e-resident of Estonia, believe it or not, a lot of techies are actually. I was able to apply online. I got a bunch of information from the Estonian police and I filled it out, and I now have an e-residency card. What does it allow me to do? It doesn't give me citizenship. It allows me actually to set up a business remotely if I want to, which is pretty amazing. And they've even given me like an encrypted key to be able to sign documents. And so I think these are lessons that are in practice today that we could perhaps learn from as local governments and state governments and governments in general look to implement a fully digital infrastructure with potentially a blockchain backend to that. So let's move on to some US-based topics. And I'm just trying to move around my photo here. Okay. So I'm going to start with Wyoming. I think many of you are familiar with the number of laws that they've actually passed in the state, particularly in 2018 to 19. I'm also going to talk about transparency and tracking donations and helping farmers in Arkansas. You may or may not have heard of. The Excelsior Pass is something that just got implemented in New York during COVID. And then we've got digital ID and homeless, a use case that's going on with UT Austin Medical School, as well as the local government. It's a very interesting experiment to see if they can help deliver better services to the homeless. And then also real estate property management out of Burlington, Vermont. So hopefully you will find these interesting because they're quite varied in terms of the use cases. So let's start with Wyoming. Sorry for the lot of words, but just wanted to kind of highlight a couple things. Number one, it is the first state to really come out and create effectively a framework supporting blockchain and crypto. It has allowed for a certain level of clarity and framework, legal framework, that is driving innovation. GBBC itself is working very closely with the University of Wyoming and their blockchain center for their Center for Blockchain and Digital Innovation. And we are finding that there is more and more entrepreneurial interest to set up shop in Wyoming because of this clarity. And so there's a direct correlation with clear rules of the road and people being attracted to go. And a lot of these entrepreneurs, including myself, never even thought of Wyoming as a destination to set up a business. And I think that's something that the state of Florida should think about, not necessarily implementing the exact same laws, but thinking about what a clear roadmap looks like for, if you comply, here are the rules, or sorry, if you want to set up shop here are the rules, and this is how we're going to help you flourish. And I think it's a combination of not only the politicians and legislators and the governor being behind this, but you've got the university that's behind this, and a lot of crypto growth companies and entrepreneurs and associations, including ourselves, who are supporting the ground level work that's going on. And I will tell you right now, Wyoming's known for energy and commodities, but it is quickly evolving to tech applications that include everything from potentially healthcare to crypto to banking, and it just on and on, right? So I think I would look at Wyoming as an example of where things are really starting to kick into gear, but that certainly does not mean there are not opportunities for many other states to make sure their area flourishes as well. And then I'm going to move on to Arkansas. Small farmers in Arkansas, in collaboration with Heifer International and a nonprofit group charitable group called BitGive Foundation, which is the oldest crypto charity, by the way. And for full disclosure, I sit on the board and I'm their treasurer. They have launched a program, it's software called GiveTrack. And what GiveTrack does, it allows you to donate in crypto, and then those fund disbursements, and right now this is the screenshot that I've provided you, and you can go to their website to actually see it. But the fund disbursement is actually recorded and available for you to see graphically here, or visually, I should say. So what has been done, and this is a very small project, it was only $10,000 that was raised to do this, but the idea is that I gave, for example, some Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin went into the pool, and it got translated into whatever the equivalent was in dollars. And then it went to the farmers who are in the program to then go buy tools with that money. And when they were dispersed the funds, you could see on the left-hand side who got funds and how much. And so this is the very beginning of a further collaboration with Heifer International, which is an extremely large NGO nonprofit. It is, they are looking to white label this into much more, many more programs, including extension of this Arkansas one with the farmers, but then beyond that, other programs they have going on at the moment. And so number one, Heifer International is an incredibly innovative organization. And number two, they've been looking at ways to use crypto for donations, but then further to that, how do we inspire and actually implement funds tracking? And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out if you can actually have transparency of money movement in philanthropic endeavors, why couldn't you possibly eventually move that to public funds? And so one of the things that comes up a lot, and we're working on another initiative around this, is federal level foreign aid, and for foreign aid to be tracked as far as it can possibly be tracked. So if money goes to USAID, just as an example, and then USAID disperses funds out to given country or given initiative, can we get to a place where we can track that? And there is a certain level of transparency and accountability to the American people. These are conversations that are happening not just in the US, but in Australia, in the UK, the UN. So it is proliferating. This notion of transparency of where your money goes, especially as a taxpayer, as a citizen, is definitely going to evolve over the next number of years. And it is a greenfield opportunity for those who are interested in this particular problem set. I'm going to move on to the Excelsior Pass, which is an app that has that New York State collaborated with IBM healthcare team to create a way for you to prove your digital proof of your COVID vaccine or negative results. I am sitting in New York right now. I will fully admit I have not downloaded it yet. I probably will just check it out just to see what the technical mechanics of it look like. I'm not really a big fan of downloading a bunch of stuff on my phone unless I know it's not going to be tracked. But having said that, they put this together very quickly in 2020 during the pandemic, and it has been released, and it is now on offer for New Yorkers to use if they choose to. And it does have a verification component, not the data saved, but the verification component using a blockchain backend. So it's another example of something that's actually in production. Going to homeless and digital ID. A lot of people talk about digital identity, self-sovereign digital identity is talked about a lot, AKA I own my own data with my address, my height, my weight, my eye color, like all of that information should be mine, right? And a lot of people agree that that should be held in under your control, but oftentimes it is not. And what's even worse for anyone who's homeless is they probably don't have an address. They probably don't have a safe way of keeping documentation and information. And so what UT Austin and the medical school in particular, as well as the business school, have done with the city of Austin is to try to work out, oh, and by the way, they've also included the Austin Travis County Emergency Medical Services. They're trying to figure out a way to use digital identification and securing an individual's records so that it can be held safe so they don't need physical copies. It is verified, it can't be doctored or fraudulently used, and it helps an individual get better health services and remove some of the bureaucracy and potentially pitfalls of, let's face it, the admin grind, especially when you don't have an address or a safe place to keep things. So I think this is a very interesting one. It's small. Again, it started with 100,000 initial grant, but we look to observe as it evolves in 2021 and hope that it can be replicated across potentially other cities as well. And then I'm going to conclude with the real estate property management example. And again, sorry for a lot of the verbiage, but I just wanted to highlight a couple big things. Number one, back in January 2020, blockchain startup Proppy and city of South Burlington, Vermont, announced the completion of a deed entitling pilot using Ethereum. They have basically coordinated a way to not only digitize these titles and deeds, but then also verify it on the Ethereum blockchain so that anyone could see the verification address or the hash. So what is interesting here is that they actually had blockchain legislation passed in 2018 to pave the way for this. They said the bill had encouraged companies to pilot applications of blockchain, particularly like in South Burlington, to reduce the cost and complexity of recording real estate transactions. I think where local governments, particularly those who need to manage property taxes, and it's critical to their sort of obviously revenue line, there are lots of interesting use cases around not only transparency and streamlining efficiencies, but actually, how can you accelerate payments to the government, which I think from a government standpoint, you probably would find interesting. So I think there's a two-way street here, delivering better services to those who actually own real estate, but then potentially having the same infrastructure allow for reducing of costs and accelerating revenue streams back to the government in a more efficient manner. So I think property tax is probably one area that's going to be on the rise, but I think it actually has to be a bigger package, meaning the whole digitization of deeds and titles, real estate transactions. You know, whenever anyone buys anything, there are tons of documentation and legal agreements and various sign-offs that go into a real estate transaction. Digitizing all of that, having that work stream managed in a more efficient way and securely, plus adding on all the fees and payments layer into the same infrastructure is definitely a use case that a number of companies are working on, but it does need coordination with local or state government, depending on the state and laws. And then, let me just check here. I wanted to keep going on the thematic about tax, just because there's some interesting things going on globally with respect to tax. EY has launched something called Tax Grid. And even though this is a cross-border, not just US, but actually withholding tax solution that works across different countries, the concepts are actually very similar. What happens when you need to show documentation or share documentation in a real estate transaction across multiple different intermediaries and parties and even the tax authority? And so they've come up with a framework that allows for this sort of maintaining data privacy while also sharing information between financial institutions and government agencies. So even though this particular grid is related to cross-country or cross-border, I still think it has application and elements of it could be pulled out for local and state government and into federal as well in the US. And just to highlight, like, what does it do? With a blockchain backend, it allows for multi-party data sharing. It allows for smart contracts or automated code that repeats a process over and over again to tokenize potentially dividend events or any kind of payments to be digitized. Automation of systems integration. I mean, that may or may not be relevant. The privacy and trust aspect is absolutely key, right? How do you keep this information secure and protected? They're using something called zero knowledge proof technology. Again, for anyone who's really interested, can spend a bit more time with the EY tax team on this. Audit and verification, I think, is huge, again, from a risk mitigation, reducing fraud and criminality point of view, and then document exchange in real time. I don't think people appreciate how much of our document sharing or information sharing has massive time lags just because we don't share the same infrastructure. And I think that's another element of just not only time saving, friction removing, but potentially huge cost savings as well. And then I'm going to give you one more set of tools for those who are interested. There is a group called New America based in DC They are a nonprofit focusing on digital innovation. Well, they focus on many different things, but they've got an initiative called Digital Impact Governance Initiative, DIGI for short, and then the Blockchain Trust Accelerator, BTA. And one of the interesting things there is they've got frameworks for a digital infrastructure for government. So any of you who are in government and would like to see more tools, I have some links here below, but they have actually spent a lot of time working on what does digital infrastructure look like for government specifically. And you can always reach out to them for help as well. And then that will take me to the next segment. But before we go there, I think there are questions, Alfredo, that you wanted to have in terms of Q&A.
Sure. I think we have a few questions in the chat, Sandra. I'll take one of them. Mike Sarasti, he's a CIO for the city of Miami. He's asking, Stony identity predates blockchain. Do you think, Sandra, they're moving towards a blockchain-based identity or repurposing what they've already built? Furthermore, Stony is often a model for city-level digital services, but many of their innovation rely on country-wide standards. How can city pursue with limited jurisdictions? Example, cities aren't in the business of producing government IDs.
So my understanding is the local government ID is on the blockchain solution, meaning your data is not on there. It's the verification that you are whoever you are, Alfredo. So it is already on blockchain solution. My understanding also is that the e-resident solution is not on the blockchain solution because I'm not a citizen of Estonia, for example. It's just I'm in a different pool, and I don't think I've been blockchain verified, but I'm supposed to be an e-resident that's been verified by the Estonian police, for example. So I do think they have different methods for whether you're a citizen versus an e-resident. The easy thing for any small country is when they have common laws and they can come up with their own structure and standards. It's a heck of a lot easier than working across multiple legal frameworks and legislative bodies. That's the challenge for the US. I think we have a beautiful thing that allows for states and local government to have a lot of power in certain elements, but it also proves a challenge when we try to have like a national ID system. It's different in India, who put in a digital ID system for what, 1.4 billion people. They were able to digitize almost everybody. Why? Because they said so, and then they just did it. The states don't have the same level of power that federal government does. And we have a very different system. So I think what will happen over time is we might rely on our driver's licensing at the state level to be one of the inputs for verifying who we are, because there is a lot of information there. I think the question for each state and local government will be, how much power do I or you, Alfredo, have over what information I record on my digital wallet, and then have the ability to show just enough information as I want to. So I don't have to flash my driver's license every time I go anywhere, because if someone needs to know I'm over 21, then they should just see a QR code or some verification code or a green stop sign that says, I'm okay, don't worry about it. It's already been verified by local government that I'm over 21. Why do they need to see my birthday? Why do they need to see my driver's license with my address on it? And that's sort of the nuance that a lot of people are trying to get to, which is we overshare our data over and over and over again when we don't need to. So if there are better tools that we have to share what we need to verify that we're over 21 or that we're a resident of a given state, but why do I have to give everything else away? We don't.
Understood. Thank you, Sandra. We have another question from one of our attendees. Is it possible for bad actors in different parts of the world to physically get hold of encryption keys and wreak havoc?
Sure. Hacking is a major problem at every level, whether you're a company or whether you are at federal level. I guess the question is, there are trade-offs, right? The more layers of security you put in, the more cumbersome it is, the more costly it is, but it does keep your stuff more secure. A blockchain solution is really interesting because if you're the holder of the private key and you can actually keep it secure, unless someone robs you of that private key, they can't take your stuff, or it's very difficult to take your stuff. The problem that we're having with, and many of you may have seen this, and this gets us a little bit into the crypto side, which is you've heard about a lot of these hacks at the exchange level. Well, it's because you, basically user, have given the rights to your stuff to somebody else to hold. And then that exchange, depending on whether they have good, systems or not, is holding that stuff. And if they get hacked and their private keys, or they get pilfered because they didn't have whatever, they didn't secure something, then your stuff is lost, right? But that's ultimately because you gave your Bitcoin or your crypto custody to somebody else. And many of the conversations that are had today around security and crypto is that you should be your own bank. You should have ownership of your own stuff, and you should secure your private key. Now, having said that, in reality, for every individual to be their own bank and to secure their own private key, I think is actually a very difficult one. And so the industry, and again, this is kind of spilling into the crypto side, security is many layers of trade-offs. How much do you do to secure your stuff? Like, you could go take your private key information and go bury it in a deep, deep hole, in Switzerland somewhere in a vault. But every time you want to do a transaction, you're supposed to pull it out. Like, how does that work, right? It's not practical. So there's a lot of trade-offs on security across the board. And just because something's encrypted with blockchain, it makes it safer. It's security by design, but there are also questions now about quantum safe, quantum resistant blockchains. So when the standard SHA 256 gets, or SHA 256 gets cracked because of quantum computing, people are worried, well, what happens there? And every encryption code is now broken in the world. Well, not quite. NIST, as well as many other agencies, have made it a top priority to look at quantum resistant solutions, which include blockchain as well as others. So there's a lot of work being done around kind of next level of encryption safety. So it's a very long answer to a question that was, I think, fairly simple.
That's fine. We'll jump to another question from some of our attendees. There is a lot of hype around the Miami coin. So I would like to get from you, one of our attendees are asking, this new coin that was just launched by the city of Miami, what are the opportunities for cities, as well as the risks, practicalities, and unknowns of creating and launching, for cities to create and launch their own crypto token? And a second question, a follow-up to that, is if you can explain the concept of stacking, which is currently being used by the Miami coin.
So I think I need some clarification here by someone who's closer to this project. So this is what I understand. The city coin, or Miami coin, is built on the Stack protocol, which is an open source initiative that relies on the Bitcoin blockchain. So that is my understanding. The stacking piece, somebody's going to have to explain that to me, because I just understood it as they have built it on the Stack protocol, which then Bitcoin blockchain.
Okay.
And then also, who's using it? That's what I'd like to know, because I think until you use it, it's very difficult to say, or you're the builder of it, it's very difficult to say like what it does. I presume it's already launched. Is that correct?
I believe it has, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd love to turn this back to the audience. Anyone using it, tell us what you think.
Sandra. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Mike just gave us a comment that the coin is not issued by Miami Coin, it's issued by City Coins. Okay. I'm sure we'll have time to address that in a follow-up conversation. I have another question from one of our attendees is, will digital ID eventually be tied to biometrics, Sandra?
Oh, that's a big one. Are there any security folks in the room? Because there are people who hate biometrics, like the worst. They think it's absolutely crazy to have biometrics tied to people's identities, but I'm not gonna go there just because I am not spending all my days looking at biometrics versus identity. But I do know that many people in the security industry that I speak to do not like biometrics tied to digital identity.
Thank you, Sandra.
But you look at your iPhone and you're smiling at it and you've turned on your, face recognition feature, you've done it.
That's true. That's true. And so to everyone that's attending right now, that we were just talking about Miami Coin, Mike Saras is in the chat. He's the CIO for the city of Miami. He is happy to share more thoughts about Miami Coin at some point if anyone has questions, so feel free to reach out to him. As again, to remind everyone, if you want to submit some questions, you have the Q&A tab right at the bottom of your screen. We are 10 minutes early to our next segment. Okay, so if there are no other questions, Sandra, if you wanna just continue, okay.
Sure.
We'll do that.
And to answer the really easy question from Rosetta, yes, we're recording this and you can have a copy of it. It'll be free and open. All of our stuff is.
That's great. Well,
Okay.
Sandra, if you can kick it off. So everyone, Sandra will be presenting on the last segment, which is cryptocurrency, digital assets, and the future of money.
Well, for all of you who have remained for the last segment here, hats off to you, because I'm not sure I'm not sick of myself and my voice going on like this for the last couple hours. However, this is a topic that's very close to me. I started off my journey in the space with crypto. For those of you who are not as familiar and didn't see my bio, I actually created the digitization team over at CME Group, where we launched the Bitcoin index pricing products, reference rate, and the real-time index, which then led into the Bitcoin futures product, which still trades today, which is one of the few regulated derivative products on crypto. And then subsequently, I left CME Group to focus on blockchain for social impact and using crypto for financial inclusion. So this is one of my favorite topics. It's one that we save for last because, as Bill mentioned, it tends to get and grab most of the limelight in discussion. And so I wanted to make sure that we covered off the other use cases before we start talking about pretty much data as value and money. So just giving you a little bit of background there. So we'll talk about cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and Ethereum. For those of you who are well-versed, apologies, but I do feel like we need to give them a nod. And then I will talk about the digitization of everything. Wall Street meets crypto world. We're still having lots of interesting frictions and pushing and pulling, but essentially value and money as data is where we end up. And who wins? I don't think it's the right point. It's a question of how many alternate systems will there be apart from the traditional world, and where do the various worlds meet? And that's what's happening today. Where are the bridges and where are the commonalities? Crypto use cases, I do want to highlight a couple. And I was asked to talk about El Salvador. I am not an El Salvador expert, but I will just give a couple of thoughts on that. And then on the horizon, in real life versus not in real life, sorry, there's a typo there. Well, if you think metaverse, DeFi, DAOs, augmented reality, virtual reality, NFTs there's being much more things being done in the NFT world. If you think all of that's just a fad, I would actually ask that you keep an open mind, because the acceleration of this stuff is actually really at the beginning of its journey. So we'll touch upon that. So many of you have seen graphics like this before, through human history, we figured out lots of different ways to value things. And frankly, why does a goat get value versus gold versus, paper money? There's a lot of interesting, topics on that. I'm not an economist. I'm not going to go there. But I'm going to talk about, as a former banker, what happened in 2008 when the Bitcoin paper was launched, and then the protocol was launched in early 2009. Because I was sitting in London at Morgan Stanley, freaking out because we had a financial meltdown, and I was on derivatives trading desk. And what was going on in the US was horrific. What was also going on in London was horrific. And it was really a wake-up call to the fragility of our global financial markets and how intertwined we really are as a global world, whether we like to admit it or not. And so with that, when this got launched, I didn't know anything about it because frankly, it was pretty much exchanged by a group of cyberpunks, and who knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. Maybe some of you do. I don't personally care, other than I'm grateful that the paper got released and the protocol was released to the world. For those of you who are interested, there's a big BBC Bitcoin explained video. I put it down at the bottom. It's actually very simplistic, but it's nice. It explains the double spend problem of basically not using the same money more than once. And I think it's kind of a neat way that they've explained it in video form. Oops, okay. And basic taxonomy, I'm not going to belabor the point here, other than if you go to this glossary, if you're ever in need of trying to look up what all these different terms are, we have a report that basically is drawn from a couple different groups as a basis of the definitions. So please feel free to take a look at that. I am not going to sit here and go through all of these definitions, but we will talk about some of these subcategories. And then again, I've got a lot of crypto terms here. This is really a reference tool for all of you. Some of you are experts, some of you are not, but here you are, just some of the big ones that I thought of. So I'm going to go to proof of work because a lot of people talk about this, and I did see a question related to energy usage and Bitcoin in particular. So I'm going to bust one myth right now, which is not all blockchains have the same energy usage as ones that have a proof of work consensus algorithm or a consensus protocol. The reason why is proof of work is designed very differently with the concept of mining than other blockchains. So please do not conflate all the other blockchains that are out there as the same thing, because others are different proof of, whether it's proof of stake, proof of X, there are different proofs out there. So different types of consensus methods. And some are as energy reliant as you turning on your computer. So if you think turning on your computer and using it is using energy, yeah, it is. But it's different than some of the other conversations that have been had around particularly proof of work. So proof of work used to, in the old days, and I will tell you right now, the crypto community of 2012, when I really got into it, is very different than the crypto community of today. Meaning, if you wanted to mine Bitcoin back then, you could literally have a dorm room or your apartment, and you could run some of these mining equipment and actually get Bitcoin. It was actually pretty easy to do. And you'll probably run up an electricity bill, but you had one or two of these rigs, it wasn't a big deal. But the competition for mining, and let's face it, the price of Bitcoin going up has really driven a big stakes business that is multi-billions now. You need to have a sophisticated operation to run Bitcoin mining, at least in a grand scale, to be competitive. These are now multi-billion-dollar companies, and a lot of them have shifted to North America in recent months for various reasons, because Chinese government has shut down effectively all the major miners. And so a lot of this industry has now moved to the Nordics and to North America, predominantly Canada and the US. I would say the photo on the right is more indicative of what you end up with now, which are very big warehouses or, big spaces where lots and lots and lots of equipment is held. And which means, in turn, as you can imagine, there's energy used. However, I think there is careful research that needs to be done before people jump to the conclusion that somehow, oh no, Bitcoin's so bad because mining is using up the equivalent of the government of, like, I don't know, Argentina or Denmark's total energy usage. The industry itself is going greener by the day. And where it may be today is not where it's going to be tomorrow. And we need to just be aware that if this industry can be the driver of adopting green, we should be encouraging that. And so there are renewables being used. There are also companies like Hut 8 Mining in Canada, for example, that are linking up with traditional fossil fuel companies that have waste that they are basically going to waste, energy waste that's going to waste, no pun intended. And they're trying to utilize that to actually pick up that waste and reincorporate it into the mining. So there are a lot of interesting creative solutions being had. I'm certainly not trying to paint any kind of rose-colored glasses around the discussions that are being had, but I do think it's important that we identify a problem as a group, and then we also encourage solutions that will get us to a place where one day, maybe carbon net neutral, maybe one day it actually drives innovation around tokenization of carbon credits and green economy and better ESG metrics. So again, I think I wanted to make sure that we talk about this because I know there are lots of officials around the world who have presented a very negative view of the energy usage of proof of work, but I do think it's a bit more nuanced than just a black and white argument. And I want to mention Ethereum because it is one that basically took the elements of Bitcoin and said, hey, how could we do something better that allows for more decentralized, more like apps to be run and what they call decentralized applications, dApps, and smart contracts, these sort of applications that are coded that just run again and again and again, which are Turing complete. And what Ethereum does is allow for really much easier applications to be built that allow for different types of processes to be run than the P2P payment system that was really the original sort of Bitcoin use case. So when I think about Bitcoin, I think of it as the genesis of all other blockchains that came after. We need to thank Bitcoin very much for that and the community today for being as it is, still very much vibrant community and ever improving. But also Ethereum deserves kudos for what they're trying to do, which is another open source, open initiative where there are languages like Solidity, which allow for very easy writing of code that allow for different applications to be written. And it does have the largest community of developers and programmers and probably users out there. They started off with their crowd sale in 2014, and then they launched in 2015 and are now where they are. I have not looked at the Ethereum price or Ether price, I have no idea, but I will have to tell you, I was in Berlin at the Ethereum Foundation HQ when the protocol was released, and it was pretty cool to be there, and it was a very low-key affair. So there are several organizations that you should look to if you want more information: the Ethereum Foundation, EF, and then the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, EEA, which obviously focuses on the Ethereum side. And then I want to talk about some of these upgrades because it's worth noting. This is a big deal, actually. So if Ethereum's been around since 2015, they have some major evolutionary things going on. So they are planning on going from proof of work to proof of stake. And that is no easy task. And so if you're interested in learning more about what that path looks like, please go to their website. I also recommend, if you are interested in Ethereum, their DevCon events. Now, obviously in the last year, they canceled. The last one was actually in Osaka, Japan. The next one's going to be in Bogota, Colombia. The link is down there. It is really, if you want to immerse yourself in what is going on in the Ethereum space, try to get to that week-long gathering because it is the who's who of the Ethereum community. But the move to proof of stake is significant, and it's going in a number of stages. And one that just occurred is something called the London hard fork, which actually recalibrated some of the rules around the fees, which my understanding did not please the mining community, but it really is the next step to evolving into a proof of stake world. So that only happened a couple weeks ago on August 5th. And for my understanding, and again, if anyone's in the audience who knows more, it has gone into play, and frankly, it's ongoing. And I don't know if too many issues that have happened, but perhaps there are, but I don't think so. EIP stands for Ethereum Improvement Proposal, I believe. And each one is an EIP that has a grade and then has a number next to it. So there are more to come, and there are some timelines here. But again, if you want to keep tabs on what's going on, crypto Twitter is a great way, following the right people, including Ethereum Foundation, but also take a look at their website. And I'm going to just show you the price because I don't want to spend too much time on the speculative side and the trading side of crypto. I feel like it gets a lot of limelight, and there's nothing wrong with it. I come from the trading side. It's just, I just want to highlight, it's now over $2 trillion worth of crypto out there. The majority is still concentrated in sort of the top, 5 or so. If you look at the increase from even a year ago, it is significant. The trend is up, and it doesn't go in a straight line up. It's not linear. It has its moments. It crashes and then comes back up again. It's certainly not for the faint-hearted. But I think anyone who doubts that this industry is not going to go from 2 trillion to 10 trillion or 20 trillion, I think I'd like to have an extended conversation with you, because the roadmap will be bumpy, but the growth trajectory is only going to grow, because this is not just a US story. It's not just an Asia story. It is a global story. And here are some latest stats. 200 million, or 220 actually, million crypto users, according to a couple different research sites. And obviously, as I mentioned before, it has grown to over 2 trillion of industry value. And obviously that number does move around. However, when we think about the journey of pre-2017 crypto versus today, we have a very different world. And a lot of the people who got in before 2017 are not the same people who are in it today. And I think we need to recognize that some of the demographics have changed, and also some of the reasons for why people are getting into crypto have also changed. And the pandemic has only accelerated digital adoption. And frankly, we're seeing explosive growth across nearly every category beyond crypto. Retail crypto, I think, the regulators are definitely keeping an eye. Legislators are keeping an eye. We are due to, I believe, have a conversation with the Consumer Protection Bureau, probably closed door, but we're definitely going to provide a landscape of where we see things today. I think there is work in progress. There was a great question in the chat about why we have so many intermediaries and why we are recreating basically old systems. I think there's a grain of truth to that. And I tend to agree with you. And if I put on my more, let's be creative and design a completely new paradigm and system, I do ask the question, like, why do we have so many intermediaries? Why do we have exchanges still? Like, where are all these people coming from that are offering services that basically financial services has, but this is just for crypto? Here's the thing. I think we have two different worlds going on. One part of the world is the crypto mass adoption. And crypto mass adoption, particularly into institutional, has to adhere to some pretty stringent regulatory frameworks and requirements. And if that's the case, you need to have a broker-dealer license. You need a trust license. You need a banking license. You need a money transmitter license, depending on what jurisdiction you're in. That you can't get around unless you're going rogue. So in many ways, you can now understand perhaps why there are so many intermediaries, because you actually need people to be specialized in being able to offer those services. And it's rare that one company, even in financial services, like a big bank, does everything. So that's one explanation. I think another one is that we almost have two different camps of thought. One camp truly believes the alternate system should be the only system, and therefore doesn't want to have anything to do with the current construct, which I get at some level. But the vast majority of the entrepreneurs that I've spoken to want this to grow and to become mainstream. And there go, our first discussion point, which is you then have to adhere to the regulatory environment. So as much as I think a lot of people had hoped there would be no intermediaries, it's not about no intermediaries. I think the question is ultimately around, do the intermediaries add value? If they're extracting rents for no reason, then they should be kicked out. And I think that's ultimately what the blockchain and crypto construct questions. Meaning, are you sitting there in the middle, whether you're in a supply chain or whether you're in a financial network, are you actually adding value? Because if all you're doing is passing one information to another group and you're not doing anything to make it enriched or better, then what are you doing in that middle? We don't need you. And I think that's where financial services are also looking at different things around what third parties do, which is not a bad thing. It actually cuts out some of the extraneous, superfluous, no value add intermediaries out there. But in the practical world, we will have intermediaries. There's opportunity for intermediaries. I cannot tell you how many crypto brokers are getting licenses right now because they want to help facilitate trading, and you need a broker dealer license to do that. So again, I can see where we are going with this. Retail will continue to explode. I do think we have some messy places. I mentioned before crypto insurance. I think custody is getting better, but we still need more robust custody solutions. And then tax. I mean, I hope someone out there is working on good tax solutions, because it's only going to get more hairy, I think, for people to report properly and to adhere to the IRS. And let's face it, if you can make it streamlined and digital and automatic, I hope someone's working on that. It shouldn't be an impediment to trading crypto or having crypto. Institutional, that's going to get very interesting, but I'm going to move on to digitization of everything else. So we got crypto, we covered that a little bit, but there's digital assets. And what I mean by digital assets is pretty much anything physical that gets digitized, whether it's gold or any commodity, but also like NFTs that are out there, like, whether it's pieces of artwork or whether it's music or videos, e-bonds, any financial instrument that gets digitized. There's just a whole world of things going on right now that fall under more of the digital assets category. And then digitized fiat currencies, that's become the rage. CBDCs, you guys have all heard, I think 80 plus countries right now have clocked in that they are working on a CBDC. My number one question is it a wholesale CBDC, meaning you're doing it to be interbank, or is it a retail CBDC and you're trying to solve a problem for the consumer or the citizen? There are actually a lot of nuances to that. I want to mention Switzerland, because just like Estonia and Wyoming provided framework and clarity, and a lot of people then flocked to those places, Switzerland in the very, very early days did very similarly. Their regulator is FINMA, and they provided very early initial coin offering guidelines. They also provided definitions around what they consider a payment token versus a utility token versus an asset token. These were all clearly defined. And then on top of that, what KYC AML requirements would also need to be adhered to. And so what you saw was an explosion in the last 5-6 years of companies, crypto companies being formed. And Zug is called Crypto Valley. It's dubbed Crypto Valley for that very reason. I don't quite understand why Zug in particular, but it's a nice town, so I can understand. But Zurich also has a vibrant community, and GBBC itself is based in Geneva, but we do that mainly because we're a nonprofit humanitarian type. A lot of humanitarian type groups are also based in Geneva, like WEF, World Economic Forum, and the UN, et cetera, et cetera. So what you see is that in Switzerland, you have had a confluence of entrepreneurs flocking to gather in one area because there was a legal framework and regulatory clarity around how to operate. So you now have licensed banks like Signum and Seba Bank in Switzerland. You have the SIX Group, which is the big stock exchange plus payments processor. Most people don't know that. They run the SIX network. They have launched the Swiss Digital Exchange, which is a separate entity under SIX that will focus on digital asset issuance, bonds, securities, you name it. They're looking at all sorts of things, and that will operate on a pure digital asset basis. And so there's a lot of innovation going on in Switzerland. And I think, again, pointing to the same thing, legal frameworks and clarity do a lot to attract entrepreneurs and innovation. So I'm going to cover, just because I was asked to cover some of the major other subcategories, stable coins. I think many people do know what stable coins are. Tether is the biggest. Then you've got USDC. They've grown a lot. But I don't know how many people actually understand why they got created to begin with. I think a lot of people do, but I just want to clarify here. Stablecoins got created because it was supposed to solve a business problem or a market problem. And one of them was actually one of the main ones that I heard particularly from my crypto trading peers was the on and off ramp. Because the banking system in the very, very early days, especially, was so difficult for crypto companies to operate, they needed an on and off ramp. So meaning something that was pegged 100% to the dollar that could be exchanged just as if they were doing dollar, that allowed you to go in and out between Bitcoin and Tether, for example, and vice versa, which acted as a proxy to the dollar. That has now taken on several other forms. There are algorithmic stable coins. There are gold-backed stable coins. I guess they all sort of serve different purposes. But to me, that original reason to have an on and off ramp was the reason why they were called stable coins to begin with. And what always perplexes me is why they are trading as they do, as if they are just another token, when they're meant to be one-for-one backed by dollar in the case of, for example, Tether or USDC. But I will leave that there. Here, I'm going to thank State Street again for having done the work for me and putting out sort of a graphic representation of how they see the different categories. And again, there are different types of stable coins, and it's important to know what the stable coin that you're dealing with is pegged to, how it operates, what the governance is, and who's issuing this thing. It's probably a private company or a private organization. Not always, but usually. And then central bank digital currency, as I mentioned again, I think a great resource is actually the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements. They represent, they're supranational that represents many, many of the central banks. So they understand what the central banks are thinking. Some people have argued that it's FOMO, why they're all trying to get CBDCs out the door. I would actually argue, I mean, I was talking to Bank of England way back in the early days and the Central Bank of Brazil as well. They have been working on researching CBDC or digital currency for a very, very long time. And I wouldn't necessarily say they're all jumping on the bandwagon very recently, but I do think there is accelerated thinking because the world has fundamentally changed and become more digital. I think pandemic had something to do with it. And I also think, you know, the Libra announcement did a little bit of jump starting, but ultimately it's accelerating what was already being discussed, which is what does the value of a central bank digital currency bring to any government or any system? And I do think it is important to discern between wholesale, meaning interbank to central bank, or are we talking about it at the retail level to the consumer? And I think one thing that's really interesting, tying back to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, is there are projects on CBDC out there, or at least contemplated discussion points that have come up. So one is Project Bakong that's actually live. And it's the National Bank of Cambodia working with a technology company called Suramitsu on digital wallets to 60% plus predominantly young demographic that have no formal bank accounts. And actually their focus is to get these young people with these digital wallets on their central bank digital currency to actually encourage banking and usage of banking services. So there's a very interesting, like almost reverse dynamic going on. And in Singapore, they're really focusing on a wholesale cross-border multi-year initiative. It's been called Project Ubin. And they've been working with different governments, including Canada and the UK, et cetera, on, and MAS is obviously the regulator in Singapore and central bank in Singapore. And they've been working at different levels of delivery versus payment, payment versus payment on cross-border. So they're looking at things from a wholesale perspective. But one that's come up for the US, which, you know, the US is working on some pilots. They have yet to disclose exactly what that looks like. Some of you might have better insight than I do, but some people have brought up, what about programming money for relief funds and for SNAP? Now, I am unclear whether that is really feasible, but I hope they are certainly looking at that as one way to add central bank digital currency, or programmable money, as some people call it, into the system. And then touching upon non-fungible tokens, because they've been all the rage. Is it just for art? I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. No, it's not. There's so much more behind it. But I'm so glad to see that it has captured mainstream attention, because it has started with the art world. And I think many artists have benefited from this. I think it's largely still within the crypto community that is supporting this, but it will continue to grow. Some of the numbers might seem staggering to you, at least it does to me, of why digital prints are basically being sold at, you know, mouth-watering numbers. But I think ultimately the view of NFT should not be that you're looking at some sort of digital representation, but actually we're looking at a realignment and a verification and confirmation of IP. And what do I mean by that? I mean, when an artist has created something, then that artist owns that IP. And when that IP in the form of a confirmed NFT transaction gets sent to me, I am now the owner and the rightful owner of that asset, whatever it may be. And the concept of NFT being used to confirm ownership and rights, especially IP, intellectual property rights, is going to be something that's going to be discussed over and over again. And one of the concepts is already coming into play, and you'll have to remind me if someone in the audience knows. And here's a website where you can get a lot of statistics, but people are already using mini NFTs to issue tickets for concerts, for example. So meaning, I can't commit, it's going to be very difficult for me to commit fraud on a concert ticket because I have an NFT concert ticket. And what does that mean? It's unique. So for me to try to forge it will be very difficult because it's already been uniquely hashed to the blockchain. And that these mini NFT concepts are really taking form. My understanding over the summer, there was no rest. Now NFTs have movement. If it's a still NFT, it's no longer cool. It needs to move now. There are lots of other embedded things going into NFTs. We're moving beyond art. There's gamification going on. I don't know how many of you heard, but a digital Gucci bag was actually sold and worth more than the like physical version. So anyway, there's a lot going on there. I just think it's something to watch. If you're in it 24/7, more power to you. I find it very difficult to keep up, but there's certainly a lot going on, and it's early days. So crypto, Wall Street meets crypto. When I started off in the very, very early days, people thought it was weird. It was crazy. Bill mentioned that. And yeah, I got yelled at a lot actually at my institution for why I was even bringing it up because it was so silly. This is just in 2015, by the way, 14, 15, 16. What's become very silly, or what was very silly, is no longer silly. And I think what we have now moved to is a world where household names that you know very well are now working with names you do not know and have never heard of. And that collaboration and crossover will only continue. And in my mind, we're just beginning to see the very early fruits of this. It will take time. Even though financial services was the earliest to look at adopting and being disrupted by crypto and digital assets, it is also the most to lose if you think about how many different categories of financial services there are. Everything from insurance to capital markets and trading to issuance to post-trade, you name it. Just it goes on and on and on. And so when you think about where we are today, fintech gets loosely thrown around, and fintech means so much more than blockchain or crypto. But you will see, I think, over time, how much the digital asset, blockchain, crypto portion will take up of fintech innovation. And I see that only growing over the course of the years. And the other thing I want to note is big tech. Big tech has to innovate. Big tech are now dinosaurs. It's really hard, I think, for some of them to accept that, but they are. What they were able to monetize and be successful on, whether it's an Apple or a Microsoft or whoever have you, it's not, or an IBM, it's not today the same world. And so you're finding that they're going into different categories within financial services when they've typically been just a tech vendor. And you're going to also see that with cloud servicing companies as well. There's a very interesting convergence going on, and it's not just startups. It's big tech also going into, and medium tech also going into financial services. So we're going to find an interesting scenario where you've got lots of different actors, and a couple of years from now, this few list of icons are going to look very different. I want to just touch upon a highlight here, which is regulation, collaboration with the crypto community, and that is on the rise. And that is a good thing and something that we're fostering. So New York State Department of Financial Services, who normally have been vilified for, the BIT license from way back when being instituted prematurely and too harshly, has really turned a corner, at least in terms of reaching out and getting feedback from the crypto community. And they did their first ever tech sprint over the course of about 2 weeks this past March on working with the crypto community on finding solutions in digital regulatory reporting. And so this is really asking the crypto community, how can you help us to find solutions so that you can report in a way that helps us to regulate you? And I don't think that should be underappreciated, that you've got a regulator asking to be innovative from the very tech folks that are, obviously doing what they're doing and being the regulated ones. So I think this kind of increased collaboration and coordination is something I'd like to see more of and we'd like to foster. And then selective use cases, people mentioned to me they wanted to hear about El Salvador. Facts, they announced on June 8th, to the surprise, I think, of many, that Bitcoin was legal tender and that it passed the El Salvador Congress, and that September 7th, which is coming up very soon, the bill becomes law of the land. And prices will be expressed in Bitcoin and taxes paid in Bitcoin. There's also been a proposal for Bitcoin mining using volcanic energy. We'll see how that project evolves, and that for every El Salvadoran that downloads the cryptocurrency wallet, they'll receive $30 US. There have been risks and alarm bells, sounded from different organizations, including the IMF and World Bank. July 1st, the US government placed 14 El Salvadorans, including many senior officials in President Nayib Bukele's cabinet, on a corruption and or undemocratic list, banning them from the US. And then FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, is watching the September 7th enactment, and they're going to be increasing scrutiny related to the travel rule for virtual asset service providers. there are a number of complicating factors. There have been several articles about whether crypto providers in the US will be impacted by this, especially by FATF, if they are engaging at all in El Salvador. I think it's TBD. We'll have to see how this unfolds. There are some pretty negative articles going out, but I tend to want to wait before saying that it's great or not. I think it's certainly a bold experiment, and I hope that the government has thought very carefully about consequences beyond just implementing Bitcoin to their debt servicing, to their ability to get more debt, to their ability to actually interact with the international world and the banking system. Because if they become their own insular network and they're shut down by the international world, I don't really know that that spells success. So again, I watch this carefully, but I think there's a lot to see as September 7th rolls around and how the population reacts, as well as how much the uptake really will be about this becoming legal tender. It is pretty extraordinary. And then I want to highlight this too, just because I've spent the last week working with Roya Mahboob. I don't know if you are aware, but she's the founder of the all girls robotics team, which is pretty famous these days. And she's also the founder of Digital Citizen Fund. She discovered Bitcoin way back when because she was paying her coders, mainly women, in local currency, and they were being robbed by their families predominantly of their wages. And so she learned about Bitcoin and started paying them in Bitcoin for them to be able to hold on to their wages. And that spurred then a whole separate program where we, GBBC was a small part in this, but worked with her foundation as well as USC School of Engineering on a project, and LA Blockchain Lab, which is now called GBBC Giving, on a project called Her Code. And we've been teaching young teachers to teach girls in Herat predominantly to learn how to code Solidity and other languages. And so effectively they're blockchain coders. And we've spent the last week trying to get them out of Afghanistan. So I'm not going to belabor the point here because this is not my story to tell. We're playing a very small part in this, but all I can say to you guys is that there have been many sleepless nights. The fear is real. We have gotten out some of the girls and the women in the technology community who are leaders and who are targets. This community, like I said, is a very powerful one. And when people need help, people step up. And it's so much so now that other governments and other humanitarian groups have asked for help of this small core group of women, by the way, sitting in the US who haven't slept, trying to get our tech girls out, our coding girls out, and their families are now assisting others to also get this out because it's such a desperate situation. So there'll be much more to say on this. There will be a story crafted around this and messaging, but I just want to say that these girls, some of them are out and then they're more on their way. So we're hoping that we can have good news by the end of the next couple of days. 1 to 2 days are going to be critical. But as they come to the US, we will be supporting them on their journey as they continue to learn to code and get an education in the US. So it's a different spin, certainly, than you might have expected me to say related to crypto. But I think there's a power to this community that's often underestimated. And when worlds collide like that, people step up. I'm going to end on this one, which is in real life versus not in real life. What do we need to do? There's actually a lot we need to do. One of them is come up again and again, which is we need common taxonomy. We need common language. We need common standards. We have a lot of cross-border issues right now, not just regulatory, but also technical standards, as well as just nomenclature standards. And so we are trying to help by just crowdsourcing the information. We are not writing the standards necessarily. I'm not saying that we're like trying to tell anyone what is best, but what we're trying to do is put it all in one place so we can get a semblance of where are we as a global community. And that work is continuing. I'm sorry, but the graphic is not that great, but you can go to the website and see this. We, in the version 2.0, have 9 working groups led by some industry and great leaders in the world, some of whom you may know. We have 100+ institutions, both for-profit and nonprofit, working on this, and over 200 individuals who are working tirelessly to lay out some of the groundwork on some of this stuff. And there's groundbreaking work being done. There's not enough work being done on derivatives on crypto, on some of the key global taxation elements. Green economy is just starting off. And so we've got these working groups that are going to lay some of the basis of where are we as a community. And that report will be coming out in 2021, as well as the updated interactive map and tools for you all to have some better search functions. So we're trying to do our best to improve the user experience. Our first step was just to get all of this information together, which is no easy task. But then the second order of magnitude is getting feedback on how do we make this better. And we definitely are getting feedback from regulators as well as enterprise on how they're using this, and academia. So we really appreciate every single person working on GSMI. And I'm going to end with this, which is, again, for those of you who think this whole metaverse gaming thing is a fad, I would be very careful about that, because there is an entire demographic of younger people who are obviously digital native. And I think this is an opportunity for Florida to think about what areas of growth right now that are just at its infancy that it can really pick up on. And I think there's some obvious ones like financial services, because you already have a banking and real estate community, financial services community. Insurance also probably fits in there somehow. Real estate for sure, and the tokenization of real estate or the digitization of real estate in every form. Tourism, gaming meets, finance, as well as NFTs, the art world. I think there's just a lot to play for here. Oh, and I should not forget sports. Sports is about to take off, and that's everything from esporting to actual sports. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of innovation, and likewise, let's face it, jobs and economic opportunity that really can be driven by local and state government, I think. And that's it. I am going to leave you to ask any other questions you might have. Otherwise, I really appreciate you staying with me for this long. It's been a long one, so I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And I just wanted to ask you one last question. As I ask Bill the same, many of local governments in Florida, I guess across the United States, we have, most of us are understaffed. Most of us, as we continue to progress in the era of innovation, most likely we'll have actors, individuals, businesses that are going to be reaching out to us. And we really don't have the capacity to have them go through a vetting system to understand or know whether or not those are good actors or bad actors. What kind of services does the Global Blockchain Business Council provides, and how could they help, this local governments that, may have questions about the validity of those requests that are coming from the private sector?
It's a very valid point, Alfredo, about filtering. Whenever there's a lot of innovation, let's face it, a lot of money involved, it attracts bad actors as much as good actors. And I completely empathize that governments are flooded, under-resourced, like you got tons of other things to worry about. So number one, local blockchain groups, meaning there must be in every municipality somebody who has a clue, who can form a small group, it doesn't need to be a big one, of vetted, trusted actors who will be eyes and ears, or at least the first filter gating factor for the government, right? And we can help too. GBBC looks at the macro world. So obviously for us to engage in every detail will be hard, but we could also certainly help. Like Alfredo, if you send me a name and a company, like we'll filter that through our network. We do this all the time in different countries. Like we have ambassador network because they help us filter out whether somebody's for real or not. Because at the end of the day, it's what Bill said, it's people. And there's gotta be relationships and people that have built trust that help us to grow this, right? And so filter process, I think having a local blockchain association or council is really important. We're happy to work with them. And then further to that, assist as well as needed if it's a bigger scope project or something. But if it's single names, we can do it from time to time. But I think having the local on the ground filter is really important. And also we need to grow the local talent. The leaders in that blockchain council and association should be working with the schools, should be working with universities. We should be working with K through 12 and through university if we're going to get this right, because we need the skill sets of today and tomorrow. And we don't have that. Those are massive gaps right now.
Sandra, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to be our presenter today. I'm sure a lot of my colleagues found this briefing to be very valuable. As of right now, we've received a lot of good messages. To close today, we have Margaret Brisbane, our Miami-Dade County's CIO. She'll be providing closer remarks. And it has been a pleasure to be the MC for everyone today. We'll make sure to provide everyone with the material that was presented today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, Margaret, or Sandra. And Margaret, the floor is yours. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you, Alfredo. Thank you, Sandra. Wow, what a great session. I really appreciate everyone's participation, and especially our two mayors who took the time out of their day, as well as Bill, to really share with us their thoughts around this topic. As you can tell, there's a lot for us to learn, and today was really one of those first educational sessions. I am sure if you walked away learning 20% more than you did today, this was an awesome session. As I said, this was the launch of really an education session. This is not the last of it. We heard opportunities for us to work together a lot more as, municipal governments, county governments, and we will create a forum to do that. We will be having some additional roundtable discussions on this topic, so you'll hear a lot more about that. So stay tuned for that. The counties also will be launching their cryptocurrency task force, and this is being led by our Commissioner Cohen Higgins. So look forward to the outcome of that task force, which will convene next month. Again, today we heard about opportunities in this space to build an ecosystem that will really drive a lot of what's happening in this city. We are on the cusp of greatness. So I really look forward to working with anyone who has an interest in this topic. And Sandra brought up a really great point. We should be looking to create a local blockchain association and council. We have a responsibility really to educate in this space. And so if anyone truly has an interest in participating in such a council, please let Alfredo or myself know. We'll be more than happy to convene such a council and look at how we can make a difference in, educating. We have to start when these kids are truly very young. And, when I look at the younger generation, they know a lot more than we did at their age. So, they're like sponges. So let's get them young. So again, thank you all for participating today. We really appreciate your time. And I hope this was beneficial for you all. Mayor Latham, good to see you still on. And I hope this was a good morning for you. I know our mayor had to step off as she had some other commitments, but again, thank you all very much.
My pleasure. It was fantastic information. I've been monitoring it the entire morning, and I think it's very useful. And of course, we'll have it available for people to watch going forward if they need the information as well. Thanks to everyone. We really appreciate it.
Okay. And thanks, Sandra. Great job.
Thank you all for your leadership. Couldn't do this without your support and collaboration. So thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.